to this virtual pension fund committee meeting. Present are members, co-opted member, advisors to the panel and council officers. And before we proceed, could I remind all of those present in this virtual meeting to put their phones on silent, please? And can I also refer members and officers to the published protocols for holding virtual meetings, which include the following. Members of the committee should ensure they have their videos on at all time, but put microphones on mute unless they are speaking. Other members, advisors, co-opted members and officers should switch their videos off and mute their microphones until they are invited to speak. If we have a technical problem, the meeting will adjourn until the issue is resolved. If the technical problem persists and the meeting is in quorum, that is that we have less than 3 members of the Pension Fund Committee, the meeting will be abandoned and rearranged for a later date, and members of the committee, as well as advisors and officers, are reminded to use the raised hand function to indicate they wish to speak. Part 1 of this meeting is being audio and video recorded and will be broadcast and available to watch and listen on the website. So, can I please ask all of those members present not to stray into a discussion on Part 2 appendices and papers, which are the pink papers, because they will be discussed in the Part 2 private session. And at the end of the Part 1 session, councillors and all relevant other people will need to log into the private meeting link, at which point the live broadcast will then stop. So if I could go on to item 1 on the agenda, attendance by reserve members. I don't think we have any reserve members. No, we've got Barat, Norman, Dean and myself, who are all full members of the committee. So item 2, declarations of interest. These have been published on the website.
Keith, sorry, Mr. Chairman, can
yes,
I just
sir.
come in there?
Yes.
I'm just slightly concerned because I missed the request to disclose. I missed the deadline. So when it came out, it was blank, but I have a standard declaration of interest that I declare at the beginning of every meeting, which I could either read out or I could just pass on to the minute taker tonight to make sure that.
I think if you just read it out quickly, Norman.
Right, I'm a member of the committee. I'm declaring a non-pecuniary interest in that I'm a director of Cathedral Independent Financial Planning Limited. We have clients who are past and present members of the Harrow Pension Scheme. My wife is a member of the Harrow Council Pension Scheme, and I'll remain in the room whilst matters are considered and voted upon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, let me see, we move on to item 3. The confirmation that the minutes of the last meeting have been approved and published on the website. Does anybody have any comments on that? Okay, I take it the minutes are therefore approved. And public questions. I haven't received any by the deadline stated. Does anybody have any petitions? I can't see anybody showing. And deputations, none have been received by the deadline. Membership of the Pension Fund Committee, we have to note that John Royal, the trade union observer for Unison, has stepped down from the Pension Fund Committee, and at present his replacement has not been found, and therefore we have a vacancy on the committee for the trade union observer from Unison. So move on to item 8, the Pension Fund annual reports and accounts and the outcome of the 2019 financial year audit. I'll ask Jeremy to introduce a report, but in very brief terms, because I do take the view that as the papers have been circulated and have been available on the council website, that all members of the committee have read the papers in full. So, Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I will attempt to be brief. The committee looked in detail at the draft annual report and accounts at its last meeting. At that time, the audit was just about underway, and the audit is now virtually complete. This week, they're doing the various tidying up that arises as part of the partner review, ready for the sign-off by the statutory date of the 30th of November, at which point the annual report and accounts will be published on the council's website. The audit has produced a very small number of amendments to the accounts. Those are listed in paragraph 5, and you'll note that they're just mainly presentational, with the addition of a couple of extra notes. And I think we ought to note that this reflects the high standard to which the accounts were prepared, and to commend those colleagues who did that before I started, mainly Shelley Jones, Chairman. The management review letter, which the auditor's report is enclosed at one of the annex. The annual management letter, which Dawn will have to sign, is also attached as an annex. And I think that's all I need to say at the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd also like to say that the audit on the accounts shows what a high standard we use when we prepare the accounts, and thank Dawn, Shelley and anybody else that was involved in preparing those accounts. I have Norman. You're on mute, Norman.
It's usually better that way, actually. So,
I think
thank you.
They're generally accepted. There's a £5 fine for doing that.
What a shame! I'm going to cash on me.
Dawn keeps the money.
I just wanted to ask, it's on page 28 of the Mazars report. There's a reference under significant findings. Of course, there are no significant findings, but this aspect of completing testing and then provide an update to further issues arising in GARMS. I think that has been already been addressed in GARMS. Is that the case? Was that reported?
Sorry, I managed to mute myself. Yes, Chair. That was there was an update report to GARMS where the where are you referring to the valuations uncertainty? Or the,
Yes.
Yeah. What was
caused by COVID, basically?
Yeah. What was discussed at GARMS was the addition of a further note to the accounts, and that actually appears in the revised accounts. It's actually it's in note 5 on page 28 of the accounts themselves. Okay. Where there was an additional paragraph summarising the impact of COVID on valuations.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? No, I don't see any. Richard.
Hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
On Dawn's letter, page 32, I'd like to ask about the assets being free from liens, charges and other encumbrance. Does Dawn still feel that's the case in view of property funds that may be in breach of various funding arrangements that they had with their tier 1 providers? And does Dawn also feel that's the case in relation to stock lending, despite the fact that we have a counterpart default indemnity from BlackRock?
You'll have to repeat them questions, Councillor, because they're quite detailed ones, and I might either have to see if Jeremy can help me out, or I'll have to come back to you because they're quite detailed.
Okay. To clarify, on your report, page 32, you put, I confirm that all assets are held from liens, charges and other encumbrance.
Yeah.
It occurs to me that that some of the assets within the various property funds will be in breach of covenants based upon valuations, and they will now have charges on them. And there are a number of funds that I believe that have liens placed on the assets in priority to the shareholders. Secondly, in relation to stock lending, I think we're very fortunate in BlackRock actually offer us a page 72, this is, page 73, a counterpart default indemnity. But notwithstanding that, are the assets then free from any other encumbrance based upon the fact that we are stop lending?
I think if it's okay with the committee, I'm going to have to get back to you on them detailed questions, Councillor, and I'll provide you a written response.
To all members, please.
Yeah, no, I'll do it to the committee. Yes.
Yeah, we can certainly do that, Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions? If not, can we note the recommendations on page 18? Thank you very much. Item 9 is the regulatory update. Again, Jeremy, if you give us a brief introduction to it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. This has been quite a busy period at the moment for various legislation changes and court judgments which are impacting on the administration side of the fund.
I think I can hear people.
The most urgent of these has been the recent implementation of the restriction on public sector exit payment regulations, which came in on the 4th of November. And these implement the government's policy of wanting to limit exit payments in the public sector to 95,000. This is a particularly complex issue for the LGPS because unlike the other public schemes, we're a funded scheme. And so if the pension is paid early, the employer pays a strain cost into the pension fund to compensate the fund for the fact that it's having to make that payment early. At the moment, there's a technical issue that the exit payment regulations contradict the local government pension scheme regulations because the LGPS regs currently give any member who's made redundant at 55 immediate access to their pension without any reduction for early payment, regardless of the strain costs. The strain costs are reimbursed by the employer. So what we've set out in the recommendation to the report is a recommendation on an approach to mitigate in the short term that conflict between the two regulations. The government is planning to introduce new local government pension scheme regulations. It was initially expected that these would be done by the end of 2020, and it has consulted on some drafts. But as we heard earlier in the training session, the other legislative priorities in the parliamentary timetable with Brexit and also the ongoing issues with COVID, I suspect it's more likely to be early 2021 before the conflict is finally resolved. The other thing that we need to adjust, and again we're asking the committee to approve the arrangements for this, is that historically strain costs have been calculated on the basis that they compensate the fund for the amount of money that it loses as a result of paying pensions early. That clearly isn't an appropriate basis for assessing the benefit to an individual employee, and so what the government is planning to introduce is some standard factors calculated by the government actuary for all funds, and these funds are also non-discriminatory in that they're gender neutral, unlike the ones which compensate the fund, which it didn't matter whether they were gender neutral or not because they weren't impacting on an individual's benefit. So those are the two things that we're asking you to do. We're also asking you to note the impact of the McLeod judgment, which is a court case where discrimination was found against two public sector pension schemes, and it has a knock-on impact into the LGPS. But the timescale for implementing that is a bit longer, but we just want you to know what we're doing for that. And then there are a couple of other smaller changes which are also impacting on the work of the admin team, which are discussed in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got Dean's got his hand up, and then Norman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, during that, Jeremy, I lost you. In fact, I lost everyone. I don't know whether anybody else suffered the same fate. But I am interested in the, like you said, the legality of what the government have introduced with the £90,000 cap and the LGPS position. And I want you to just touch on that again so I can hear it properly this time. I lost everything at that point.
Right. In essence, the regulations which limit exit payments to 95,000 mean that if the total amount payable to an employee, so for example, the person's redundancy payment and the impact of the cost, the strain cost of paying the pension early, these are not allowed to exceed 95,000. Currently, so if they exceed 95,000, we would have to reduce the amount of pension to a point at which the strain cost plus the redundancy payment came within that 95,000 limit in order to avoid breaching the cap. Currently, the LGPS regs entitle anyone who's age 55 or older to immediate access to their pension without any reduction for the early payment. And so clearly, if the strain costs breach 95k, you can't comply with the 95k limit and pay an unrestricted pension. There is an inherent conflict, and what we've tried to put in place here is arrangements to manage that basis while the LGPS regs catch up.
No, I sort of got that bit. So what are you asking? Because I was trying to scramble through this here for us to do, because I know that there's a review going in, obviously from the trade union sides that are questioning that part regarding the regulations of the LGPS and the 55-year position there. So what are you asking us to do, Jeremy? Thank you.
Right. I think the first thing to remember here is that as the pension fund committee, we're acting as the administering authority for the pension fund. We're not in this capacity acting for London Borough of Harrow as an employer, and it's important that we make that distinction. As a pension fund, to avoid breaching the 95k exit cap, what we're proposing that we do is pay either an actuarially reduced pension or a deferred pension. We're going to offer the member that choice in cases where if they're aged 55 plus and the total of exit payments would exceed the 95k. Now, we understand that there is a risk of legal challenge, but it depends how you want to take your medicine, really, whether you want to breach the 95k cap regulations and have the Secretary of State come down on us like a ton of bricks, or face a legal challenge in respect of this one, where it would be possible, if we were found to have breached it, to remedy that. Because once you've made a payment, you can't get the money back. You see, or it's difficult to get the money back.
Yeah,
so that's where we are. We recognise that there is a risk of challenge. The obvious solution would be to say we're not going to make anyone redundant. But as I say, we're not the employer. We're the administering authority for the fund. So that's not a decision for this committee to take. Okay,
and then we are between a rock and a hard place here, aren't we? Because if we don't comply, the Secretary of State has a little pot. But then again, they're the ones that have made the mistake in the first place by not actually looking at the regulations with the LGPS. When they came up with this, they didn't actually do their homework on it entirely. But if we then move into not supporting that, then we face an employee taking us to court. So it's a bit of a rock and a hard place here. Between the two financial, and I'm trying to put on my other hat here, so do forgive me, but as being on the pension committee, I don't mind telling the Secretary of State that they've got it wrong. I'm not too sure what hat I'm wearing now on that one, but at the end of the day, they should have done the homework on that. And I'm just, all right, the mitigating cost. What do you see as the greater cost, i.e. the employee taking us to court or the Secretary of State having a pot? What powers and where could we go with that?
Right, yeah, the legal advice that we had, and we wrote this with the help of our legal colleagues, is that and this advice comes from the scheme advisory board as well, is that currently we should work on the basis of offering the reduced payment to the employee, on the basis that if we're then taken to a tribunal and have to make an additional payment, we can then do that, but in liaison with the employer, because we're not the individual's employer in all cases. If we make a payment to an employee and find, or to a scheme member and find that it's unlawful, it's quite hard to recover that, to recover the position again, particularly if the individual spent the money, to put it crudely. So that's the advice is that this is the best way for us to protect the fund in our role as the administering authority. So that's why we're recommending this approach. It's totally I agree, the whole thing is totally unsatisfactory, but sadly we didn't create this situation. We're having to find a way, pick a way through it whilst the two sets of regs are in conflict.
Well, yeah, thanks for that.
Okay, Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not often I read a paper and I'm quite gripped by it. I was quite excited when I read this, and I thought this would be an interesting one to discuss. Might seem a strange reaction. I was actually going to ask whether the unions had been consulted. That was interesting what Dean said. But my real interest is this is going to cost. It's not just going to cost some of the, from a sort of pension point of view, but it's going to cost the pension scheme to administer this, isn't it, as you've indicated? Are we, Jeremy, going to be, I'm interested in those who've retired or died since 2014, and do all of these people, do we know what numbers are involved, and do all of these people have to be written to tell them that this review has been done and whether they are impacted? And what about existing members of the scheme contributing and deferred? Will they have to be communicated with from an individual point of view? But I was interested to see that there is really going to be a lot of work involved because of all of that. And have you got any idea what it's going to cost?
Right. Councillor Stevenson was talking very much about the McLeod judgment there, Chair. Of the 4,200 members, the priority cases for us will be the 775 or so who are already retired, or who are deceased, and in which case we will potentially have to write to their surviving the people who are in receipt of the survivor benefits. What we will probably do, I think, is to work through the calculations for these people first, and then obviously contact those people who where we have to make an adjustment to the amount that of their pension, and of course that will be good news for them generally. There will probably, in all probability, be a proportion of that group for whom the impact is very small, but it may be that one of the things we'll have to think about, and we'll talk to other administering authorities to find out how they're approaching this one as well, whether actually we need to communicate with everyone who's retired in this period, even if actually their existing arrangements remain the one that they're entitled to, or whether that will cause confusion. I'm not quite sure. The currently active members, we obviously have a longer period of time to deal with them, or at least until they retire. The thing becomes urgent with them immediately when they retire. But we will need to have done something with all of them by 2023. In terms of what it's likely to cost, we haven't got a figure yet, but I would think the additional administration will probably cost it in the order of 15 to 20,000. I would imagine, in terms of staffing, but all potentially that it would be that sort of order would be my guess based on some estimates, some crude estimates that Hymans Robertson have made at LGPS level. Plus, of course, the software changes, where the software providers will make changes to everybody's system, but of course they do charge all of their customers for those changes, and I have no idea what the software fees will be yet.
But perhaps it's not going to be quite so significant, the cost, as I'd anticipated.
It's still a big time. It's still a big, if you think 15 to 20,000 is the equivalent of a person for about 3 to 4 months, working full time on that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bharat.
Okay. In relation to this 95k cap or limit. It seems to me, listening to you, that there is some uncertainty as to whether the courts would agree with this limit in terms of its legality. Am I right? Because we have no precedent.
I think the short answer is that the 95k limit is certainly legal because there's a statutory instrument that's supporting it. The remedy if we're in breach of the LGPS regs would, as my understanding is, would be that they'd have to go ultimately to the pensions ombudsman. So it would be the pensions ombudsman, I think, who would adjudicate on whether we'd applied the regulations correctly rather than the courts. That's my understanding, but of course, I think the short answer is we'd prefer it if somebody else were the test case rather than Harrow. Is in all honesty.
Okay, so there is no question about the legality and therefore about complying with this 95k limit. We cannot breach that, and therefore we have to go along with your recommendation. Because if we don't, then it might be a risk that we would be on the wrong side of the law.
Yeah. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up, so can we accept the recommendations on page 96 of the report? Sorry, Richard.
Oh, thank you. I got in late. I've spoken to Jeremy during the meetings about this whole subject matter, and I've got to say to you, Norman finds it exciting. That's the one-word adjective. I would like to add the word confusing as my one-word adjective. I do see it as important. I found the McLeod and Sargent judgment to be seminal in the way we move forward. I consider it highly complex, and I pay tribute to Jeremy in his oral presentation, which was absolutely so much better than the written paper here. It really came across very well, Jeremy, and thank you for doing that. Spot on. I've got some comments, ladies and gentlemen, to make. Strain costs. We do need to understand strain costs better, and I would urge you to, away from this meeting, to understand it. It's suggested by Hymans Robertson that the impact, paragraph 9, is unlikely to be material unless it's small employers. Well, okay, that's a guesstimate in my opinion. I'm not sure I will be comfortable to take much comfort from that until I knew how they came to that opinion. I mean, it flagged that to your attention. Paragraph 12. I think we mustn't forget we're providing a service. Hope you can see me. And I think our clients have an expectation of a level of response, a speed of response, a competence of response, and a diligence. This is their money, their retirement. And I'm concerned that we may not be meeting the needs of the staff as per paragraph 12 because of the extra workload involved in the additional timeline. And I would say to officers, not sure this is good enough. That you need to assess what the impact will be, but there is a reasonable level of expectation, in my opinion, as to turnaround time and competence. The exit cap on paragraph 14 I thought was very interesting, and was developed in 15. On paragraph 20, it says the resource implications of this measure are not thought to be significant. Well, it depends. We don't fully understand it, and it could be. I'd just like to flag that up. On paragraph 27, I guess 27 and 28 and 30 is how many revisits are required. It could be significant, and we shouldn't underrate it. And I think there is a need for us to say to the staff that the clients and to the trade union representatives, you've got to follow through to make sure that the level of service that your members are getting is appropriate in time and quality. So I'm dubious, if I might say, as to whether it won't have an effect. You would then say, on paragraph 32, the judgment will have a significant impact on the fund's liabilities. The paragraph's correct, and the previous paragraph's correct, but sometimes we've got insignificant, not material, then we've got significant. I'm going to suggest to you it's very confusing, it's still not clear, and the biggest impact won't, in my opinion, be on the strain, but it will be on, I'm going to say, to Dawn and to trade union, to members of staff, the members of staff who expect the level of service which they've had previously, can it be delivered? I noticed the report did not mention, and perhaps this is a policy issue, and please advise me, outsourcing any of this. It talked about temporary staff. I presume there'll be fixed term contract. Is this any part of this that could be outsourced? Thank you for listening to me.
Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The comment about not material. First of all, this is in terms of the impact of the strain costs. The reason for that is fairly straightforward. Currently, strain costs, as I say, are intended to provide the fund with full compensation for the early payment of pensions. The revised methodology for calculating this using the GAD factors, which calculate the benefit to the employee. Hymans Robertson have advised that for all LGPS funds, the impact is to reduce the strain cost figure by between 10 and 20%. Now, if you overlay that with the fact that once we apply the cap, the maximum value for strain costs will be 95,000. In any individual case where the strain cost is 95,000, the maximum impact of that, even at 20% of 95,000, is only £20,000 a case, and you need with a fund of nearly £900 million, you need a lot of cases at 20,000 a go to get up to anything that's material in accounting terms. So that's why we believe that the impact of the change in the strain cost isn't material, because we have done some mental arithmetic on that. I can put that calculation in. I can write that calculation down for people whose mental arithmetic or my explanation or hearing of my explanation of the mental arithmetic is not too great. I think the other thing to say is in terms of the administration, we are, the fund at the moment does provide a very good service in terms of the admin service to scheme members, and it's our intention to continue to do that as far as possible. This will put pressure on the staff team, but we will look to increasing the capacity of the staff team at the appropriate time in order to ensure that we continue to maintain those standards. I certainly haven't looked at outsourcing any of this work, because that's not been part of my remit with Harrow to do that. I don't know whether Dawn would want to comment on that particular one. Thank you, Chair.
I mean, I can make a comment on that. I mean, Jeremy and I have discussed how we think is best to handle, in terms of best to manage this. We do think it's best to try and keep it within the team because of the knowledge of the team of the LGPS scheme and the actual pension system. So our preference would be we try and manage it with the team. We act people up and then we just backfill at the lower end admin end. So that would be our plan at the moment as to how we try and resource it. We also think it will be quite difficult to get people in to do this because of trying to get people in and getting them up and running straight away.
Okay, I don't see any other hands at the moment. So are the committee acceptable to the recommendations on page 96 of the agenda? Yes.
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much for that. So we move on to the risk register on page 105. Again, that's over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be even briefer on this one, hopefully. It's what we felt it was time for the committee to review the risk register again. It hadn't been done since 2018, and there are a number of things that have changed recently. We've continued to use the standard Harrow format in terms of the scoring the risks in terms of impact and likelihood. But what we have done is made a couple of changes to the format of the register. We've tried to pull out separately those risks that we need to keep a close eye on, which in terms of the scoring, they're at the higher end of the risk spectrum, and so they're either flagged in colour terms as amber or red risks, and there are 13 of those, and they're summarised in Appendix 2. Within that list, there are a couple of new ones. There's the regulatory conflict issue that we talked about under the last item, and also the impact of the McLeod judgment. So we've added those to the risk register because they do certainly present a risk at this point in the process. Also on that list, we've escalated the risk around the impact of having a small team, and what many people would describe as key person risk. And I think Dawn's sort of difficulties in replacing Ian when he first left meant that it was appropriate to increase that one onto the list of risks that need managing. The other thing that we've done is put all the risks that are currently flagged as green into a separate list. And there are a significant number of those which are really business as usual things that we manage as part of our day-to-day processes and activities. And so we've proposed that actually we'll continue to apply the controls that we already have in place for those and keep an eye on them that way, and actually remove them from the register so that the register becomes a much more usable and appropriate document. Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure I got anything to add to that, really.
So are there any questions or comments? No, I can't see any. So are we happy to accept the recommendations on page 106? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. And we move on to the performance and valuation, the regular update on page 125. Before we start, can I point out that the appendices 3 and 4 are confidential, and we shouldn't be discussing them here. If there are any questions on the confidential appendices, we will have to move into a private session. Jeremy.
Thank you, Chair. That you saved me. That was the first thing I was going to say, so you saved me from mentioning that. This is the standard report that you normally get. I'll highlight that Aon's dashboard in Appendix 1. The funding level has risen slightly since the last meeting. It's gone up to 89.3%, and that's as a result of small increases in the asset value in the last quarter and small reductions in the liability figure. The PERC report at Annex 2, we've done some work over the last couple of months with PERC to try and improve the presentation of this, and we've added some additional charts in the appendix, which hopefully members are able to draw some better conclusions from those. The valuation of the fund at the 30th of September is just under 891 million. The position continues to be volatile. We've just completed the October reconciliation today, and I'll share that. I'll send that round to the committee in the next couple of days. But it's the value reduced from 890 to about 880 million. But I understand that during the last couple of weeks, as a result of the vaccinations primarily, and possibly to a lesser extent the American election result, the fund values and markets generally have increased significantly in the last 2 or 3 weeks. The work programme is for the next meeting is for noting, and as part of that, Chair, I wondered if you wanted to highlight anything particular for the training for next time. The one suggestion that I had, which comes partly from the investment strategy review report, is that possibly we might look at Record and in the way in which they approach the currency hedging arrangements for the equity portfolio was one suggestion I was going to make following discussion after we discussed that report. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll take that at the end if you remind me, because we may have come. When we go through part 2, we might find some other things that we might need to think about for training for the next meeting. Colin.
Yes, a couple of quick comments. First of all, the PERC numbers are still wrong as far as I'm concerned, and I've discussed this with Jeremy, who is following up with PERC, and PERC did find a mathematical mistake in their formulae, which is disturbing. But the numbers still seem to me wrong to me, so I think we're following up on that. I have some other comments on London Civ, but maybe that should be taken under the next section, which is probably a more appropriate place for it. So that's I'll come to the stage.
Yep. Okay, thanks for that, Colin. I can't see any other hands appearing, so can we just note the public part of this report? Again, we'll probably come back and discuss something in part 2. Is that okay? Good. So I haven't got any other urgent business. Nothing has been sent to me, and so that concludes part 1 of the Pension Fund Committee. We then will move into part 2, and members of the committee. Sorry,
it's me, Keith. Just a quickie. As we it's not really urgent business, but I noticed item 7 mentions about John Royal retiring. I'd like to give John our thanks, because he attended many meetings, particularly in the earlier days, and he found it very interesting, and I just hope he's all right. I mean, that's the reason he's retired. But I'd like us to, if we agree, to convey greetings to him and to thank him for his interest over several years. I had many conversations with him outside the meetings about the fund, and he does recognise how important it is for his members. So that's all I wanted to say. I hope you don't mind me just sort of throwing that one in.
Okay, I think if we add those comments to all members of the committee and have them recorded in the minutes. Thank you very much to Joe. So we've now got to leave this meeting, and we've got to join another meeting. So I propose that we have a 5-minute break while we try and work out the technology. See you all in again in 5 minutes.
Hope so.